Hello and welcome back to the channel. Welcome to you if this is your first time. Today we're going to use this one fence picket to make this cube that you can see glowing there. Let's get started with the project. I'm using 80 grit sandpaper to remove the roughness on both sides of the cedar board. You can use a planer if you have that, but just to keep it simple, using 80 grit sandpaper and just doing that quickly. From the bottom end of the board, I measured and marked 30 inches, and that's why I made a cut, and that's more than enough, but just in case I run into issues and need an extra one, just wanted to make sure I have enough material to work with. The width of the board is 5.5 inches, so I'm going to try to get 3 pieces at 1 3/4 inches wide, and I'm going to mark that from the fence so that I can make those cuts. So the idea is that after ripping the boards into 3, I'm going to try to put it back together and then glue it after staining the 3 pieces with 3 distinctive colors. However, the issue here is when ripping the board, I'm taking off material in between the pieces, so it kind of makes it a little bit hard to put it back together exactly because you lose some material when you're ripping the board. But we're going to try to make it work. And one thing you would notice, the knots on the board, they make it easy to figure out where the boards should come back together. It's not perfect, but it gives you an idea. So the 3 colors I'm using are actually the 3 colors that I have that are fast drying because I wanted this to go quickly. The dark walnut, and then I'll apply weathered gray to the middle piece, and then I'll just use white chalk paint for the other piece to give it high contrast, sort of. You can use the color of stains that you have available. Just make sure there is a contrast between the one color and the next. That is what brings out the beauty of it. Now the challenge that I ran into is with the board being warped. It was hard to get the boards to stay flat and connected at the edges, you know, to get a flat board. It was not a flat board to begin with. So you want to make sure you have a flat board to work with so that you don't run into the same issues. And then I tried gluing it together and keeping the boards as flat as possible. Like I said, the board is warped, so it's a little bit challenging. And I used a number of clamps to hold it down until it dries. I'm using parchment paper that I had used on a different project to capture these glue squeeze out at the bottom. At this point, I want to quickly remind you that all you need is a little bit of faith and some action. And whilst I let that dry, I went back to the table saw and ripped 1.5 inches off the remainder of the board. Those will be used to trim the outside of the tray. In case I didn't mention it, we're making a tray, and you'll see that shortly as we get to the next steps. If you look closely, you would notice the board is wobbling whilst I'm ripping the board there. But with just a little bit of faith, we're going to make it work. After the glue was dried, I removed all the clamps, and then it was time to go make our final cuts on the miter saw. So on the miter saw, I set the miter gauge to 30 degrees, and then that's where I'll make the 3 cuts. I'll start with making a 30-degree cut at one of the edges, and then I'll measure the distance from the edge and then use that as the width of the board that I'll be cutting. It's more or less a diamond shape, as you will see. The width that I have once I made that first cut was 6 1/8 inch, and that's the same dimension that I'm going to use to measure and make the next cut. So each one of the 3 cuts that I'll be making will be at that width. And then I'll just repeat that 2 times. We only need 3 pieces of that. Next, I'll cut the strips that are going to wrap out around the tray at the same 6 1/8 inch width on the inside of the angles. And like I said, that will be used to wrap around the tray. And we'll need 6 pieces of that. I know a lot of people like using stop blocks to make repeated cuts. I like measuring twice. I like the idea of measuring again before I make the cuts. So what I'm doing here, I'm using the board that I've already cut and using it as a guide for the next one. You can set up a stop block if that's your preference, but this is my own preference. With all the cuts made, now it's time to put it together, and this is pretty simple. It's just the 3 pieces. You just orient the diamond shaped pieces in whichever pattern you would like. If you take a close look, you would notice that it is a cube. Let me show you another view of it. And here I just showed you another layout that you could use where you would like to arrange it. There is no right or wrong way. And I may not have mentioned that this is something you can make as large as you would like it to be. You still want to make sure you keep it close to a diamond shape. And in order to do that, in order to make it larger, you will need to make the strips a little bit wider. I'm using a 1/2 inch board, sorry, 1/4 inch plywood to serve as a base for this. The one mistake I made was to cut the plywood to the dimensions of the hexagon. I should have waited, which I did afterwards, but put it all together, glue it together, and then after applying the trim around, then put the bottom piece, the 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch board at the bottom to strengthen the whole piece and not just this part of it, not just the hexagon or not just the 3 diamond shapes. I hope that makes sense. You'll see it later on. And here it is with all the trim just set around it. I haven't attached it yet. And then I'm going to add a couple handles on 2 sides of it. To fasten it all together, I'm going to use wood glue and some brad nails, 1 1/4 inch brad nails. To make it easier to fasten the nails, I'm going to raise the whole thing up using 2 pieces of 2x4. And now with all those sides fastened, I added a 1/8 inch plywood at the bottom to cover the whole thing. And then I'm just using staples to hold that down. And this is the part I said I wished I had done with the 1/4 inch instead of attaching just the initial 3 pieces to the plywood. Use the plywood to cover the whole bottom instead. That's a better option because it makes it even stronger. And then I'll just give it some quick hand sanding with some used sandpaper. That was 120 grit sandpaper to make those edges smooth. And you basically have a rustic tray that you can use as a decorative piece or to hold your beverage or food, whatever you want to use it for. And here's the final piece. I hope you're encouraged or inspired to go and make one of these. It's very simple, very easy to make. You don't have to add the handles to it. So good luck with your build. I really hope you would make an even better one than this, or maybe a larger size. And that's it for this one, my friend. Until next time, take care and God bless, and I hope you will have a tangible experience of God's love today.